The crystal chandeliers of Le Bernardin cast a warm, golden glow across the pristine white tablecloths as Richard Sterling adjusted his Italian silk tie for the third time in 10 minutes. At 52, he commanded respect wherever he went, his steel-grey hair perfectly styled by Manhattan's most exclusive barber, his custom-tailored Armani suit worth more than most people's monthly salary, his presence alone enough to make waiters straighten their postures and hostesses check their appearance twice. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of New York's elite, the gentle clink of crystal glasses and silver cutlery creating a sophisticated symphony that spoke of wealth, privilege, and power. Across from him sat his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, her small hands folded politely in her lap, dark eyes, so much like her mother's, taking in every detail of the opulent restaurant around them. Her navy blue dress with white pearls had been chosen by her nanny, but Emma had insisted on wearing the small silver bracelet her father had given her for her last birthday, the one engraved with "Daddy's Little Princess." This monthly dinner had become their sacred tradition since the bitter divorce 18 months ago. Though Richard often found himself checking his phone more than engaging with his daughter, his mind constantly pulled toward the next deal, the next acquisition, the next mountain to conquer in his relentless pursuit of success. Sarah Martinez had been working at Le Bernardin for 3 years, and despite the demanding nature of serving the city's most powerful and often entitled elite, she genuinely loved her job with an enthusiasm that surprised even herself. At 28, she moved through the dining room with practiced grace, her smile authentic even after 12-hour shifts that left her feet aching and her back sore, her genuine warmth cutting through the often cold atmosphere of high-end dining. Tonight felt different, though. There was an electricity in the air, a tension she couldn't quite name, as if something significant was about to unfold in the elegant space she'd come to know so well. She'd served the Sterling table many times before. Mr. Sterling was known among the staff as demanding but ultimately fair, always leaving a generous tip that helped her cover her night school tuition and her younger brother's medical bills. His daughter was an absolute delight, polite, curious, and surprisingly mature for her age, always remembering to say please and thank you, asking thoughtful questions about the food, and sometimes shyly showing Sarah drawings she'd made at school. The little girl's eyes would light up whenever Sarah remembered her preferences, and Sarah took genuine pride in those small moments of connection. As Sarah approached their corner table with leather-bound menus, she couldn't shake the feeling that this evening would be one she'd remember for years to come, though she had no idea why her intuition was sending such strong signals. The evening began with all the smooth sophistication that Le Bernardin was famous for. Richard ordered his usual, the 7-course tasting menu with carefully selected wine pairings, each bottle chosen to complement the chef's artistic creations, while Emma chose the children's pasta with marinara sauce, her favorite whenever they came here, though she always asked for it to be served fancy like the grown-ups get it. Sarah served them with her characteristic warmth, remembering without being reminded that Emma preferred extra Parmesan cheese and bringing her a small cup of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and a delicate sugar cookie shaped like a star. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation, the soft lighting creating intimate pockets of privacy among the elegantly dressed diners, business deals being discussed over champagne, romantic proposals planned over dessert, the quiet drama of wealth and power playing out at every table. Richard found himself actually relaxing for the first time in weeks, his shoulders dropping as he listened to Emma tell him about her art class and how she'd painted a picture of their old house, the sprawling estate in the Hamptons, where they'd all lived together before everything changed, before the late nights at the office became all-nighters, before the arguments about priorities and family time became screaming matches that ended with lawyers and custody arrangements. For a moment, Watching his daughter's animated face as she described mixing colors to get just the right shade of blue for the sky, he felt a sharp pang of something he'd buried deep beneath layers of ambition and pride. Regret, loss, the crushing weight of choices that couldn't be undone. The shift began subtly, like storm clouds gathering on a previously clear horizon. Richard's phone, which he'd promised himself he would ignore tonight, buzzed insistently against the mahogany table with an urgent message from his assistant in Tokyo. The screen displayed words that made his blood run cold. The multi-million-dollar deal he'd been orchestrating for 8 months, the acquisition that would cement his company's dominance in the Asian market, was falling through due to regulatory complications and a competitor's last-minute bid. His jaw tightened involuntarily as he read the detailed breakdown of everything going wrong, his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack like ice under pressure. Emma noticed the change immediately, her cheerful chatter about school friends and art projects trailing off as she watched her father's expression transform from relaxed attention to the cold, calculating mask she'd learned to fear. The numbers dancing across his phone screen represented not just millions in lost revenue, but partnerships that had taken years to cultivate. Relationships he'd prioritized over family dinners and bedtime stories, now crumbling in real time while he sat powerless in a Manhattan restaurant. When Sarah approached their table to check on their meals, her professional smile bright and genuine, Richard barely looked up from his phone, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he fired off increasingly terse and demanding responses to his panicked team halfway around the world. The warmth that had filled their corner of the restaurant began to dissipate like morning mist, replaced by an invisible but palpable tension that made Emma shift uncomfortably in her chair, her small hands fidgeting with her napkin as she recognized the signs of her father's rising anger. Sarah returned to their table 20 minutes later, carrying a small porcelain plate adorned with the restaurant's signature logo, a complimentary dessert from the chef, a delicate chocolate soufflé with raspberry coulis and gold leaf that the kitchen often sent to their younger guests as a special touch. She approached with the same genuine smile she'd worn all evening, her steps light and confident, completely unaware of the storm brewing in Richard's mind as he continued to receive increasingly dire updates about his collapsing business deal. The soufflé was a work of art, rising perfectly from its ramekin, the raspberry coulis arranged in an elegant spiral that spoke to the chef's attention to detail and the restaurant's commitment to excellence. As Sarah began to set the plate down beside Emma's nearly finished pasta, explaining that the chef wanted to wish the young lady a wonderful evening, her sleeve, starched and pristine at the beginning of her shift, but slightly wrinkled after hours of service, caught the edge of Richard's wine glass. Time seemed to slow as the glass tilted at a precarious angle, its contents, a $200 bottle of 2015 Burgundy that Richard had specifically requested from the restaurant's private collection, cascading in a crimson arc across the pristine white tablecloth. The wine spread like a bloodstain across the fabric, pooling around Richard's phone and splashing onto the sleeve of his $3,000 suit jacket, the one he'd worn to close his last major deal, the one that represented everything he'd worked for. Sarah's face went ashen with horror as she realized what had happened, her hands immediately reaching for napkins while a stream of apologies began flowing from her lips. The accident was truly minor in the grand scheme of things, easily remedied with club soda and professional cleaning, the kind of mishap that happened in restaurants every day around the world. But Richard Sterling was not having an ordinary day, and his tolerance for imperfection had been worn down to nothing by the pressure of watching his empire teeter on the edge of collapse. The explosion was swift, brutal, and completely disproportionate to the minor accident that had triggered it. Richard shot to his feet with such violence that his chair scraped against the polished hardwood floor with a harsh, grating sound that cut through the restaurant's gentle ambience like a knife through silk. His voice, normally controlled and measured in even the most heated boardroom negotiations, rose to a decibel level that made nearby diners turn and stare in fascination and horror. The words that poured from his mouth were vicious and personal, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage on the young woman standing frozen before him. He questioned Sarah's competence with surgical precision, her intelligence with contemptuous dismissal, her worth as a human being with the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to treating people as disposable resources. He suggested loudly that she was clearly incompetent, that she had no business working in an establishment that catered to people of substance, that she should perhaps consider finding employment more suited to her obvious limitations and lack of basic coordination. The venom in his voice seemed to surprise even him, but 8 months of pressure, the stress of his crumbling business empire, his failing marriage to his second wife, and the constant battle to maintain his position at the top of a ruthlessly competitive industry had found a target. Sarah stood frozen like a deer in headlights, tears welling in her brown eyes as the entire restaurant fell into an uncomfortable silence, every patron now watching the humiliating spectacle unfold before them like witnesses to a public execution. Some diners looked away in embarrassment, others leaned forward in morbid fascination, and a few began reaching for their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something that would likely end up on social media within the hour. Emma sat motionless in her chair, her small hands gripping the edge of the linen tablecloth so tightly that her knuckles turned white, watching in complete shock as her father transformed into someone she didn't recognize. The man who read her bedtime stories with different voices for each character, who taught her to ride a bicycle in Central Park with endless patience, who kissed her scraped knees better and told her she was brave. This couldn't possibly be the same person. This stranger wearing her father's face was cruel and heartless, using his voice like a weapon to tear down someone who had shown Emma nothing but kindness. Sarah's tears began to fall silently, tracing silver paths down her cheeks as Richard continued his tirade, each word like a physical blow that made her flinch and shrink into herself. The other diners exchanged uncomfortable glances, some clearly enjoying the drama, while others looked genuinely disturbed by the display of raw power being used to crush someone so obviously defenseless. Several people had their phones out now, recording the scene for posterity, capturing what would surely become another viral video of privilege run amok. The restaurant's manager, a distinguished gentleman in his 60s who had handled countless difficult situations with diplomatic grace, began moving toward their table with purposeful strides, his expression grave as he prepared to intervene. But before he could reach them, before Richard could unleash another wave of verbal assault, Emma's voice cut through the chaos like a beam of pure light piercing storm clouds. Her words were quiet at first, almost a whisper, but they carried a moral weight that silenced her father mid-sentence and drew every eye in the room to her small, determined face. "Daddy, stop. Please." The 3 words hung in the air like a judge's gavel, each syllable carrying more authority than all of Richard's shouting. Emma stood up on her chair with the kind of courage that only children possess, her 8-year-old frame suddenly commanding the attention of every adult in the room. Her voice grew stronger and clearer as she continued, her words carrying the simple truth that adults often lose in their complicated lives. "Sarah is nice to me. She always remembers that I like extra cheese on my pasta. She asks about my drawings and remembers their names. When I told her about my hamster, Mr. Whiskers, she asked about him the next time we came. Mommy says we should always be kind to people who are kind to us, especially people who work hard to take care of us." Richard's mouth hung open, his anger deflating as quickly as it had erupted, like air rushing out of a punctured balloon. Emma climbed down from her chair with careful dignity and walked around the table to Sarah, taking the young woman's trembling hand in both of her small ones. "I'm sorry my daddy was mean to you, Sarah. He's not usually like this. I think he's just very sad about something that happened at work, but that doesn't make it okay to hurt your feelings." The silence that followed Emma's words was deafening, broken only by the soft sound of Sarah's quiet sobs and the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Richard looked around the restaurant with new eyes, seeing his reflection in the shocked and disgusted faces of the other diners. Some held their phones aloft, having captured his moment of cruelty for digital posterity, their expressions ranging from judgment to complete revulsion. Others simply stared with undisguised contempt, their whispered conversations no doubt spreading his name and reputation through the interconnected web of New York's social elite. But it was Sarah's face that truly broke him. Not angry or defiant as he might have expected, not even afraid, just deeply hurt and profoundly disappointed in a way that reminded him painfully of other faces from his past. She looked at him the way his first wife had looked at him the day she'd finally asked for a divorce, the way his business partners had looked at him when they'd discovered his habit of ruthlessly undercutting competitors, the way his own father had looked at him during their last conversation before the old man's death, and most devastatingly, the way he'd never wanted his daughter to look at him. Emma guided Sarah to sit in the empty chair beside her, her small hands patting Sarah's arm with the kind of instinctive compassion that seemed to flow naturally from her pure heart. The gesture was so genuine, so innocent in its desire to comfort, that several diners wiped tears from their own eyes, moved by the stark contrast between the child's kindness and her father's cruelty. Richard Sterling, master of hostile takeovers, destroyer of business competitors, builder of a corporate empire that spanned 3 continents, found himself completely speechless in the face of his daughter's simple humanity. He watched as Emma reached into her small designer purse and pulled out a packet of tissues she'd been saving from their last visit to see her mother. Tissues that bore the logo of her mother's favorite cafe, a small reminder of the life he'd lost through his own choices. The restaurant remained frozen in time, as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting to see what the billionaire would do next, whether he would double down on his cruelty or find some shred of decency buried beneath layers of pride and entitlement. Richard's phone continued to buzz insistently with urgent messages about the Tokyo deal, about plummeting stock prices and market fluctuations and board meetings and all the things that had seemed so monumentally important just moments before. But for the first time in years, perhaps the first time since Emma was born, he let it buzz unanswered, ignored the siren call of business that had consumed his life and destroyed his relationships. He was learning something profound from an 8-year-old child, something that all his Ivy League education, his MBA from Wharton, his decades of business experience had never taught him. True power didn't come from tearing others down or asserting dominance over those less fortunate, but from building people up, from using whatever advantages you had to make the world a little kinder, a little more just. The lesson was simple enough for a child to understand, yet apparently too complex for many adults to grasp. Richard removed his wine-stained jacket with hands that trembled slightly, folding it carefully and setting it aside as if the gesture represented more than just practical necessity. He sat down slowly, heavily, as if the full weight of his actions was physically pressing down on his shoulders, aging him years in the span of minutes. For the first time in their 3 years of interactions, he truly looked at Sarah, not as a service provider or a convenient target for his frustrations, but as a complete human being with her own dreams, struggles, and dignity. He saw a young woman working multiple jobs to pay for night school, someone who sent money home to help support her family, someone who remembered a little girl's favorite foods and took genuine interest in her artwork. He saw someone's daughter, someone's hope for a better future, someone who deserved respect and kindness regardless of her economic status or position in life's hierarchy. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had become the kind of person he'd once despised. The kind of wealthy bully who used privilege as a weapon against those who couldn't fight back. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but every person in the restaurant strained to hear his words. The apology that emerged wasn't the calculated response of a public relations team or the hollow words of someone trying to save face in front of cameras. It was raw, genuine, and came from a place deep within himself that he'd forgotten existed. His heart, his conscience, the part of him that Emma still believed was good, despite all evidence to the contrary. "Sarah, He paused, struggling to find words adequate to the moment, to the magnitude of his failure as a human being. "There is absolutely no excuse for what I just did. No amount of stress, no business setback, no personal frustration justifies treating another human being the way I just treated you. You have always been nothing but professional, kind, and generous to my daughter and me. You've gone out of your way to make our evenings here special, remembering Emma's preferences, bringing her little surprises, treating her with genuine care and attention. You deserved so much better than my cruelty tonight." He reached into his wallet, but not for money, though he would ensure Sarah received compensation far beyond any tip she'd ever received. Instead, he pulled out one of his personal business cards, the heavy stock paper embossed with gold lettering that had opened doors around the world. On the back, he wrote something that would change both their lives forever, his personal phone number and a job offer. His company desperately needed people with Sarah's emotional intelligence, her ability to connect with others, her grace under pressure, her capacity to see the good in people even when they failed spectacularly to see it in themselves. The offer he wrote was for a position in his company's emerging human resources division, with a salary that would allow her to quit her night job and focus on her education, with benefits that would cover her brother's medical treatments, with opportunities for advancement that could transform her entire future. As he handed her the card with hands that shook slightly, the entire restaurant began to applaud, not for him, not for his grand gesture, but for the lesson they'd all witnessed, for the power of a child's moral clarity to pierce through adult cynicism and awaken dormant conscience. 6 months later, Richard Sterling stood before his company's board of directors in the gleaming conference room on the 50th floor of his Manhattan headquarters, announcing a revolutionary new initiative that would transform their corporate culture from the ground up. Employee wellness programs, comprehensive mental health support, community outreach partnerships, and a company culture built on respect, dignity, and genuine care for every person who contributed to their success, regardless of their position in the hierarchy. Zara Martinez, now his Director of Human Relations and Employee Advocacy, sat beside him at the polished mahogany table, her quiet confidence and innovative ideas helping to implement changes that would ripple through the corporate world and inspire other companies to follow suit. Her first initiative had been a company-wide training program on treating service workers with respect. Her second had been partnering with local schools to provide scholarships for children whose parents worked in the service industry. But the real transformation had happened that night in Le Bernardin, when a little girl's extraordinary courage had reminded her father that true success wasn't measured in stock prices or market dominance, but in how we treat the people around us, especially those who have less power, less privilege, less ability to defend themselves. Emma had taught him that kindness wasn't weakness. It was the strongest force in the world, capable of transforming hearts, changing lives, and creating ripple effects of goodness that spread far beyond their original source. The wine stain had been cleaned from his jacket by the best dry cleaner in the city, but the stain on his character, the darkness that had consumed his soul, had been washed away by something far more powerful: the honest, uncomplicated love of a child who still believed her father could be better than his worst moment, who saw not the monster he'd become, but the man he could still choose to be. We want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for listening to our story today. These moments of transformation happen all around us every single day, often sparked by the most unexpected voices. The wisdom of children, the courage of those who speak truth to power, the simple human decency that reminds us who we're meant to be. Your engagement and support mean the world to us, and we're genuinely curious to hear your thoughts and experiences. Please take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're listening from around the globe, whether you're in New York or New Delhi, London or Lagos, Tokyo or Toronto. Your perspective enriches our global community and reminds us that kindness, compassion, and the courage to do what's right are universal human values that transcend borders, cultures, and languages. Share your thoughts about Emma's incredible courage, Richard's journey from cruelty to redemption, or any similar moments you've witnessed where a child's wisdom changed everything, where someone found the strength to transform their life, or where kindness triumphed over power and privilege. We believe these stories have the genuine power to inspire real change in our world, one heart at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of moral courage at a time.